Hi, welcome to the video. So I have to talk about this Bob Ross documentary. It was definitely a tearjerker, and I feel like it was just really well done. The first thing that struck me was the music. It sounded like this Tim Burton, Danny Elfman collaboration or something like that. It had this kind of happy music put against a really sad story, and I just liked the music the whole time throughout the documentary. And I feel like I knew this about him, but they talk about how his hair was a perm, and Bob's son Steve was saying how his dad his whole life was really into his hair and would switch it up, and so it's just kind of funny that wound up being his signature look. He also lived in Spokane for a little while, which I thought was kind of cool because I live in Western Washington in the Seattle area. And I know that his paintings were inspired by when he lived in Alaska, but I wonder how much was inspired by Washington State, because I find myself to be very inspired by the state. The state, depending on if you're in the east side or the west side, can vary a lot. The east side is more desert, but I think Spokane has some green to it. I went through Spokane once, but I didn't know that about him. I know that he spent some time in Alaska, and I think he's from Florida, so that was interesting to learn. And then I found out that he was married 3 times. And then at other parts in the documentary, they talk about how much of a flirt he was, how he was asked before why he spoke so softly in the show the way that he did. And I'd always heard that it was because he had been in the military and just didn't ever want to yell again, and so it really influenced him to be very soft-spoken. But then in the documentary, it expanded upon that and said that he believed that the majority of his audience was women, and he felt like he wanted to speak gently because his audience was women. And also they tried to say that he tried to be sexy, and that was part of his way of doing that and appealing to more women, which, okay, Bob Ross. He was, come to find out, inspired by a man called Bill Alexander, and they showed clips of Bill's show, and it had a similar look, but the vibe was very different. Bill was very boisterous, and Bob had mentioned that he wanted to, he just kind of found that to be jarring, and he thought that a painting show should be more chill, I guess. While Bob was his protege and he learned, obviously learned a lot from him, he also learned how he wanted to be different and make, put his own stamp on painting in the art world. So Bob was a traveling artist, and he did these art demonstrations where people would come and he would teach them how to paint. So during that, he met a woman named Kowalski. So this whole documentary is centered around his relationship with the Kowalskis, basically, and how it devolved. She starts out as this sympathetic character who is grieving the loss of her kid. I think it was an adult child. I'm not exactly sure. But they talk about how she didn't want to get out of bed and was just so sad over the loss of her son, I think. And she went to this art class that Bob was teaching and thought that he was magical, and her and her husband, being business people, thought that there was opportunity there. And Bob, probably just being the nice person that he was and loving painting, kind of got sucked in. And that's another thing that his son and other people, like friends in the art world that he had, talked about, was the Bob that you saw on TV was very close to the way that he was in real life. He was said to be a very, very nice person, and he loved nature, loved animals. Annette's husband, Walt, was a retired CIA agent, and they mentioned that he would always record his business calls. He seemed like a really weird guy. The whole thing seemed really weird because there was also talk that Bob had an affair with Annette. And it was just this really, really weird, like, intermix of business and personal, it seemed, that got really messy. And Bob seemed to have gotten taken advantage of because he really just wanted to paint for the love of painting. And again, was a really nice person. And these people seemed to be pretty shrewd business people. Didn't really care at what cost because they just wanted money. And the Kowalskis declined the offer to be in this documentary up until the end when they made a statement. And they basically kind of denied everything that we're getting into from the documentary. They denied any wrongdoing, anything bad that they ever did, and they denied that Annette ever had an affair with Bob. So that's pretty much all that we got from them. They're apparently a very sue-happy couple, so people a lot of times don't want to go up against them because they don't want the time and expense of going to court. And as you'll see, they have plenty of money to take people to court. I noticed that when they interviewed Bob's son, Steve, how much he looked and sounded like Bob. And you can just tell, like, they interview him in his home, and the home is kind of disheveled. There's a lot of like old paint supplies around, cans. Kind of just shows somebody who's not kind of depressed, not a very happy person. And even when he would talk, you could tell that he's got a lot of hurt. He misses his dad. He has a lot of resentment towards the Kowalskis for everything that they've done. And you just definitely feel for him. Bob was really friendly with a lot of other painters. Bob had his own style of painting. He did landscapes. He befriended this couple that also had a TV show on around the same time that did flowers. And they, you know, he kind of seemed to want to lift up other people that did things that were similar but yet still different from him. He seemed to be able to appreciate other people and their talents, and it wasn't really a competition. It was just like there was room for everybody, and he just seemed to have a lot of other artist friends, which I think speaks volumes about somebody when it's really easy to be, well, I don't know. Is it easier to be nasty and competitive, or is it easier just to be nice and gracious and share the spotlight? And I don't know, which is easier? I kind of feel like it's easier to just be chill and like let everybody do their thing, but I don't know. As you'll see, not everybody is like Bob. Danny seems to be getting frustrated. I'm watching them on the baby monitor. She did not sleep well last night and didn't nap very well today, so I don't know if we're in for a bad night. There was one point in the documentary that they talked about the 100th episode of The Joy of Painting being in 1986, which happens to be the year that I was born, which is pretty cool. And then they talked about the name of Bob's show, The Joy of Painting. So around that time, there was like a lot of The Joy of books around, like The Joy of Cooking, The Joy of Sex. So it was meant to play on that. Which kind of ties back into like how Bob supposedly tried to be sexy and flirty and stuff, which is just weird to see him like that because I never got that vibe, but apparently like that's what he was like trying to put out there. Bob's second wife, Jane, passed away of cancer, and not long after that, Bob got a diagnosis of non-Hodgkin's lymphoma. And when he got his diagnosis, the thing that he wanted to do the most was work. They said that they would do as many as 3 episodes a day, and he really just wanted to put as much out there as he could. And it makes sense. I think that if I had such a grim diagnosis that I would want to distract myself as much as I could and live life as well as I could until I couldn't anymore. So that really makes a lot of sense. So the Kowalskis, around this time, knowing that Bob was ill, they didn't want anybody to know that he was sick. And they were panicking because their moneymaker, they soon weren't going to have it anymore. So there's one bizarre part of the documentary that talks about how Annette tried to hijack the flower painting gig from that couple that I talked about before. She copied their how-to book exactly down to like the photographs of her in the book. She ruined their relationships with the paint distributors and the brushes that they used, and really just tried to push out this couple and take everything from them, which was really, really bizarre and so blatant. But it just shows kind of how desperate they were to find something else when they knew that they were going to have to figure something else out. Steve talks about how his dad wanted him to follow in his footsteps, and I think at the time he didn't understand that it was because he loved him, but Steve wanted to go a different route. He didn't want to do what his dad was doing, but in hindsight talks about how he really appreciated his dad and knew that he did it out of love. And it's just so sad. You can see how much he misses his dad and just how angry he is about everything that wound up happening to his dad and his dad's legacy. One thing that I didn't know about was Bob wanted to do a kids show. And while he was sick, he did one. I've never seen it, never heard of it, but he thought that there was a built-in audience with kids. And he was right. I can remember watching Bob Ross in syndication. It ended in 95, I think that might have been the year that he passed away. And in 95, I was 9, and his show had been on since the 80s, so I definitely caught it when it was on. And I really liked it. It was very chill. You know, it's kind of cool to watch somebody do a project. It's just easy to get into, I think. So he was right about that, and it's just sad to see that things were cut short, and I just wonder how much more he could have done. He probably would have gone on to do so much more good. And think of how influential he is now. When he passed away in his 50s, if he lived longer, he could have done so much more and possibly prevented what wound up happening with the Kowalskis. So the Kowalskis, in addition to that weird flower painting hijacking that they did, they really, really tried to pressure, coerce, trick Bob into signing over everything to them. They tried to get Steve in on it, and Steve refused. And Bob left everything to Steve and his half-brother Jimmy. So his half-brother got majority because Steve was so much younger. And then Bob even went as far as marrying the nurse, one of the nurses that was taking care of him, so that was his third wife. He tried to do everything that he could to prevent what inevitably would happen. And it got to a certain point where, you know, going back to what I was saying, the Kowalskis didn't want everybody to know that he was sick. So a lot of his friends from the art industry didn't know. And those that did find out, Bob would tell them, you know, I've lost my hair, I'm 85 pounds, I don't want you to see me like this, I want you to remember me the way that I was. It's just so sad. And some of his friends never found out until way later, and they weren't able to go to their funeral. And the Kowalskis felt that if people found out that Bob had passed away, that it would be the end of their fortune. And later on, when you see that they took the Bob Ross industry over to the Netherlands, that they wanted to make it appear that he was still around. And they even, within the Bob Ross, you know, art school, that they taught these certified painters, these certified Bob Ross painters, how to paint just like Bob Ross. They even had these artists counterfeiting Bob Ross's work, signing Bob Ross's name. It goes to those depths, which is so insane and sad and just really, really evil. Steve eventually would sue the Kowalskis, but come to find out, Bob thought that he was doing the right thing and protecting everything by giving the majority of his company to Jimmy. But it turns out that Jimmy, for whatever reason, and we don't know because he was not interviewed for this documentary, he sold his majority shares to the Kowalskis, and when Steve sued the Kowalskis, he lost. So the Kowalskis continue to make millions off of anything Bob Ross, and Steve makes nothing. And when he lost, he basically went into seclusion. He went back to Florida and was really bitter about it all, and that completely makes sense. It's understandable. It reminds me a lot of New Line Cinema and Wes Craven. Wes Craven made Nightmare on Elm Street, and when he was shopping around the movie, he couldn't get a lot of people to get on board with it, but Bob Shea of New Line Cinema liked the idea and basically bought it off of Wes and made all these sequels and made a lot of money. They also made merchandise from Freddy Krueger, and I'm sure there was resentment on Wes's side, but then later on when they had him come back for New Nightmare, they renegotiated and gave Wes some back pay and some other deals that kind of mended that bridge a little bit. But this really reminded me of that. And it goes to show how some people just kind of lose their humanity in a way when they get into these deals and they forget that people are involved, and they don't have any appreciation for the talent behind the people. They just want everything that they can get. They really don't care who they hurt in the process. The documentary also shows Steve going to go visit Bob at his grave, and there were a few parts in the documentary where I cried. This part where he's talking to his dad at his gravesite and says, "I miss you, Dad." It's pretty much just gut-wrenching. I can't even talk. It's always sad to see somebody who's grieving a family member, whether it be a parent or a child or a spouse. I mean, it's just sad. They interviewed a couple people about the impact that Bob Ross had in their lives. One person who was contemplating taking their life, and they went and sat down in their living room and a Bob Ross episode came on, and it captivated them and gave them a reason to live. And then this other woman was having some organs fail while she was pregnant and wound up having to terminate her pregnancy, and she saw the Bob Ross show and she was in the hospital, and it helped pull her out of her depression. And I don't know if it sounds trivial, like you watch a painting show, but I just feel like the world is so sad, and sometimes we can go through things so debilitating that you never know what is going to help you come through, and it can be anything. Sometimes just keeping your hands busy, keeping your mind busy can make all the difference. And when you're creating something from start to finish, you do have this level of accomplishment, and you can kind of escape into that, lose yourself for a little while, end up with something that you've created and you feel good, and for a little bit you've escaped what was crushing you. And there's a lot of power in that, I think. It was a really good documentary. You should really watch it if you're a Bob Ross fan. If you have seen it, let me know what you thought about it. I know before I watched it, I saw headlines about how people were just so enraged about the story behind Bob Ross, because there's probably people out there that are a lot like me. Maybe not just my generation, but there might be a lot of people out there that don't know the backstory, don't know what happened to them, because I had no idea about any of this, and it is incredibly sad. And it would be nice, a lot of times when documentaries come out or reporters get a hold of a story and spread it far enough and people get outraged enough, sometimes change can be made. So it would be really nice to see if Steve got back his dad's name and everything, because I think that if anybody should have it, it should be him. His dad wanted him to have everything. And ultimately, regardless of who was behind the business of Bob Ross, and if the Kowalskis weren't so, I mean, as bad as the documentary painted them, I'm not saying that they don't deserve anything for their part. I'm sure maybe if they were better people, they could have mutually benefited with Steve and done the right thing. But it'll be interesting to see if anything happens from it. But if you like this video, give the video a like and subscribe if you want to see more of my videos. And I'll see you in my next... I can't talk tonight. I need to go. I'll see you in my next video.